Worldwake is a Magic expansion that was released in 2010 as the second set in Zendikar Block. As with its predecessor, Zendikar, it was a set that was mechanically focused on lands, and flavor-wise it was focused on adventure. It was a very strong set. In fact, I think after making this video that it's one of the strongest Magic sets of all time. Several cards from the set have been banned or restricted in multiple formats, and many of the set's cards have performed incredibly well in competitive Magic. I use a scoring system in my videos that rewards cards for achieving first tier top 8s, like Pro Tours, and second tier top 8s, like Regional Championships, and the scores on this list are completely absurd compared to what we usually see. It took 122 points to make the list at all, and the top 3 cards on it all have more than 400 points. For comparison's sake, when I looked at Darksteel earlier this year, a set that is considered quite powerful in its own right, the number 10 card only had 66 points, and the number 1 card only had 211. Yeah, that's how powerful Worldwake is. It blows a set like Darksteel completely out of the water. There are even several super powerful cards in Worldwake that didn't make this list, like Celestial Colonnade and the other creature lands, Tectonic Edge, Death Shadow, Arbor Elf, Explore, Terastodon, and many more. So the set is incredibly deep when it comes to powerful cards too. To be eligible for this list, a card had to receive its original printing in Worldwake. In all, there were 142 cards eligible, and in this video we'll look at the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic the Gathering. This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. Use the links in the description to visit their store. At number 10, it's Eye of Ugin. Fittingly, for a Zendikar list, we're starting with a powerful land. It's a legendary one that reduces the cost of colorless Eldrazi spells you cast by 2 generic. You can also pay 7 generic and tap it to tutor up a colorless creature card and put it into your hand. Notably, it does not actually tap for mana, most of the time. One really fun thing about the storytelling in Zendikar Block is how the plane really transformed across its 3 sets. The first Zendikar set was all about going on adventures in a dangerous world filled with traps. The second set, Worldwake, was about the world becoming even more dangerous as the world itself was seemingly coming to life. And the last set was Rise of the Eldrazi, which revealed that the Eye of Ugin had been imprisoning frightening eldritch horrors for millennia, who then emerged and came to dominate the plane. Because of the way the block was constructed, when Eye of Ugin came out, no one knew what an Eldrazi even was, but it would be revealed in the very next set. Of course, we know today that they are huge, colorless creatures, the most powerful of which are still considered some of the strongest creatures in the entire game. The Eye saw some play in standard Eldrazi ramp decks, which looked to use both the Eye and Eldrazi Temple to power out creatures like Emrakul the Aeon's Torn and Ulamog the Infinite Gyre. After some standard success in 2010 and 2011, the Eye also saw some play in modern Tron decks, which combined the powerful Eldrazi lands with the 3 Tron lands, once again, with the plan being to power out insane Eldrazi creatures. However, these decks largely operated on the fringes of the format, and Eye of Ugin didn't make a major return to competitive play until 2016, when we took another trip to Zendikar. This time around, the colorless Eldrazi weren't all huge, super expensive monsters. There were lots of smaller ones too, like Eldrazi Mimic, Thought-Knot Seer, and Reality Smasher, the 3 of whom could quite easily come down on turn 1, turn 2, and turn 3 respectively, and oftentimes even earlier than that. Basically, these cheaper, smaller Eldrazi could be powered out very quickly using the Eye and Eldrazi Temple, and this spawned Eldrazi aggro decks in Modern. Their dominance of Pro Tour Oath of the Gatewatch ushered in a period known as Eldrazi Winter, which was a period during which Eldrazi decks were by far the best deck in the format. Ultimately, Eye of Ugin had to get banned to bring these decks under control. These decks were so good that they were basically ported to Legacy and Vintage, where the Eye was and is still legal. To this day, Eye of Ugin sees play in Eldrazi decks in the Eternal formats, especially in Legacy, so it's still pretty active. But so is every single other card on this list, so it's hard to say whether or not it will ever rise any higher. At number 9, it's Khalni Garden, a land that enters tapped and can be tapped for green mana, and when it enters, it gives you a 0/1 plant token. Because I recently did top 10 deserts, I've been talking a lot lately about how good lands are that give you value, even seemingly small value, a lot lately, and I'm going to do it again here. Sure, this enters tap, so it's a little bit slow when it comes to mana, but giving you an actual body on board is a huge deal. You're basically paying 0 mana for a land plus a 0/1, and that's amazing. At a minimum, that token body can often buy you a turn, and sometimes there are decks that can really take advantage of it. For example, in Standard it was played in polymorph decks where the only creature was Emrakul Eon's Torn. Khalni Garden gave you a way to generate a token to target with polymorph and cheat the big Eldrazi into play. In Historic, it was played in sacrifice decks that loved getting some free fodder with one of their lands. It's also often been played with Primeval Titan over the years, appearing alongside it in Standard, Modern, and Legacy. The Titan comes with the ability to tutor up 2 lands and put them into play when it enters or attacks, and grabbing Khalni Garden is the way to go if you need to get your shields up before probably winning with the Titan attack on the next turn. In Modern, these decks also used bounce lands, which can sometimes allow you to get more than 1 plant token out of the garden. It's also sometimes played in Legacy Lands decks, which run tons of singleton lands to tutor up with crop rotation, and Khalni Garden is something you can grab when you need another turn or so to set up your land combo, which involves making the huge Merit Lage token with Dark Depths. It's also played in Pauper, a format where only commons are legal. It appears in lots of different decks there, but has most frequently appeared in decks that have lots of great ways to get big value out of Khalni Garden, like Deadly Dispute. As in modern Khalni Garden decks, these decks also tend to run bounce lands to get more than 1 plant out of each garden. Khalni Garden is still very active in both Modern and Pauper. At number 8, it's Amulet of Vigor. For 1 generic mana, it's an artifact. Whenever a permanent you control enters tapped, you untap it. At first glance, this probably seems like kind of a silly card that's just there for people looking to build some kind of wacky kitchen table deck, but this cheap artifact is actually far more powerful than it looks. While there wasn't really anything meaningful you could do with it in Standard, it's a key card in one of the most dominant Modern decks of all time, a deck that has been around since 2014, and it remains a top-tier deck even today. I'm talking, of course, about Amulet Titan decks. These decks are all about using the Amulet to quickly accelerate into powerful early-game plays like Primeval Titan. This is accomplished most notably with the Ravnica bounce lands like Simic Growth Chamber. These enter tapped, can tap for 2 mana, and require you to bounce a land you control to its owner's hand. Well, with the Amulet in play, these lands untap before getting bounced, giving you access immediately to the 2 mana they provide, but things don't end there, not by a long shot. If you combine these lands with cards that let you get extra land drops, like Summer Bloom and Azusa, now you can just replay the same land for every land drop and produce 2 mana every time. In other words, if you play an Amulet on 1 and Summer Bloom on 2, you could cast your Titan immediately, who in turn would search up 2 lands that would also get to be untapped. So if you grabbed a Boros Garrison and a Slayer's Stronghold, you could buff the Titan immediately and give it haste, attack with it and trigger it yet again, at which point the game was pretty much over. Ultimately, these decks were way too fast for Modern, and Summer Bloom got banned as a result, but Amulet Titan decks have continued on in the format even without that powerful card. They aren't quite as fast or consistent as they once were, but they've still been more than powerful enough to continue doing their thing for the last 11 years. At number 7, it's Searing Blaze. For 2 red mana, it's an instant that does 1 damage to target player or planeswalker, and 1 damage to target creature that player or that planeswalker's controller controls. It also has Landfall, a mechanic introduced in Zendikar Block, which means that if you've had a land enter the battlefield this turn, something good happens. In this case, it does 3 damage to both targets instead. Searing Blaze is simply one of the best burn spells in Magic. While it might not quite have the efficiency of Lightning Bolt straight up, removing an opposing creature and bolting your opponent and then attacking with your whole board is often a devastating turn for your opponent. This is especially true when the creatures you have in play love it when you cast spells like Monastery Swiftspear and Dragon Rage Channeler. Furthermore, Blaze becomes very easy to trigger in formats with fetch lands like Arid Mesa, and people virtually never have to settle for the weak 1 damage mode on this card. Searing Blaze has been played in aggro and burn decks in every format it's ever been legal in, and right now it's still very active in Modern and Pauper. At number 6, it's Stoneforge Mystic. That's right, this list is so stacked that one of the most well-known cards from it is only at number 6. For 1 generic and a white, it's a 1/2, and when it enters, you tutor up an equipment and put it into your hand. You can also pay 1 generic and a white to put an equipment card from your hand onto the battlefield. A 2-mana 1/2 that draws you one of the best cards in your deck every time you play it is very powerful, and that's usually what the Mystic amounts to. It was a key card in many standard decks, many of which ended with Blade, because the deck could run equipment like Sword of Feast and Famine, which could be found by the Mystic. Despite the name, the deck more frequently searched up Batterskull, since getting it into play on turn 3 was a hard thing for opponents to contend with. The most famous of these decks was Caw-Blade, a deck so dominant that it eventually got Stoneforge Mystic banned in Standard. While it was preemptively banned in Modern, it was finally unbanned in 2019 and has seen regular play since then. And no matter the format for Stoneforge Mystic, and it sees play in Modern, Legacy, and Vintage these days, it's most frequently searching up powerful equipment, with Kaldra Complete the premier equipment to search up and cheat into play these days. But it's also used in more combo-oriented decks. For example, it's grabbed Sword of the Meek to enable Thopter Sword combo. If you have Thopter Foundry in play along with the sword, you can sacrifice a sword to the Foundry, which makes a 1/1, which brings the sword back from your graveyard. This lets you make a Thopter and gain 1 life for every mana you have every turn. It's also used in Hammer Time decks, which look to use Pure Steel Paladin to equip powerful equipment for free, including the aforementioned Kaldra Complete, as well as Colossus Hammer. Stoneforge Mystic is just a great card that sees play in multiple formats right now, and it's going to continue to be highly successful. At number 5, it's Lodestone Golem. For 4 generic, it's a 5/3 artifact creature, and it makes all non-artifact spells cost 1 generic more to cast. So, it's a symmetrical tax effect, but if you're playing an artifact deck, Lodestone Golem can become pretty one-sided, and when you can pull that off, this Golem's effect on the game can be absolutely devastating. It's been hard to make use of the Golem in most of Magic's formats because it's kind of expensive and so few decks are mono artifact, but this Golem has thrived in the Eternal formats, where there's a plethora of fast mana as well as super powerful artifact decks. When you can power out Lodestone Golem way ahead of schedule, it can be particularly nasty, since slowing your opponent down by an entire turn is often enough to win you the game, especially because you have a creature that can also slam in for 5 at a time. It's been the most successful by far in Vintage, where Mishra's Workshop and the Power 9 make it super easy to play the Golem on turn 1. Artifact decks that run the Golem also tend to run lots of other hate artifacts, like Sphere of Resistance and Thorn of Amethyst, making it even more likely that you can lock your opponent out of the game before it even gets started. Lodestone Golem is also the 3rd card so far that Wizards of the Coast had to take action on, because it proved to be too good for Vintage, Magic's most powerful format, so it got restricted to 1 copy per deck in 2016. But tons of decks still run the 1 copy they are allowed, especially because tutoring things up in the format is really easy. Lodestone Golem is another card that's going to continue to rack up points. At number 4, it's Nature's Claim. For 1 green mana, it's an instant that destroys target artifact or enchantment and its controller gains 4 life. This is the only 1 mana instant speed disenchant effect in Magic, arguably making it the best one around. Letting your opponent gain 4 is a downside most of the time, it's true, but it's usually well worth it for something so efficient, and in a pinch you can even blow up your own thing to gain some life, although I only recommend doing that in emergencies. Because it's so efficient, it sees lots of play, especially in Modern, Legacy, and Vintage, and it's been especially prolific in Modern, where it's a sideboard staple. If you play against a green deck in that format, you can bet that they're packing Nature's Claims in the sideboard. At number 3, it's Jace the Mind Sculptor, perhaps the most well-known card from Worldwake, and for good reason. These days, we're used to getting insanely pushed Planeswalkers in every set, but Jace was the first time one felt truly broken, and for a long time it was considered the most powerful Planeswalker ever printed. He costs 2 generic and 2 blue and starts with 3 loyalty. One of the great things about him is that he has 4 loyalty abilities, not something a lot of Planeswalkers get, especially at 4 mana. His +2 lets you look at the top card of target player's library, and you can choose to put that card on the bottom of that player's library. This ability is surprisingly powerful, as it can allow you to lock your opponent out of ever drawing something useful while ticking up Jace's loyalty. His 0 ability is effectively Brainstorm. In other words, you draw 3 and then put 2 cards from your hand back on top. Brainstorm is one of the most powerful cards in all of Magic, and Jace can just fire it off without lowering his loyalty. He's also got a -1 that can bounce a creature, which comes in handy when you're a little bit behind, and he's got a -12 that exiles an entire player's library and then shuffles their hand into their library. So it completely disarms them and then puts them in top deck mode with very few cards left. So you can see why this card's completely insane, especially for only 4 mana, and this was especially true in Standard, where it was a staple that teamed up with Stoneforge Mystic to make Caw-Blade one of the most dominant decks Standard has ever seen. and it got banned after only being in Standard for about a year as a result. When the Modern format was created, Jace, like Stoneforge Mystic, was preemptively banned, so he didn't put up any top 8s there between 2011 and 2018, when he was finally unbanned in the format. These days, he actively sees play in Modern and Legacy, primarily in Control decks, and that's not going to be stopping anytime soon, while he's likely been surpassed by Oko, and perhaps Minsk and Boo. When it comes to Planeswalker power, he's still one of the best Planeswalkers ever printed 15 years later, and one of the best Magic cards we've ever seen. At number 2, it's Dispel. For 1 blue mana, it's an instant that counters an instant spell. Kind of like Nature's Claim, this card doesn't do anything that seems insane, but it does it so efficiently that it's been heavily played in multiple formats over the years. Instants are incredibly common, especially in Modern, Legacy, and Vintage, and Dispel is especially good at sniping other counter spells, which are all over the place in those formats. In fact, while it might look more like a sideboard card, the majority of its points in those 3 formats have all come in the main deck, because it's just a fact of life that you're going to run into powerful instants that you need to counter if you want to win lots of games. Only needing a mana to blink something like Force of Will is pretty great. It's effectively a staple, especially in Modern and Legacy, and it's going to continue to rack up tons of top 8s in Vintage too. However, it may never be able to catch the number 1 card on the list, which is similarly heavily played, and that card is Bojuka Bog. Yeah, I bet most of you probably expected to see Jace or Stoneforge Mystic at the top of this list, but it's actually just a common land that comes away with the number 1 slot. I mean, we've established that this set is incredibly busted, and this is still what comes out on top? Really? Well, yeah, it might not be as flashy as Jace or the Mystic or Eye of Ugin, but Bojuka Bog is in the same family as Dispel and Nature's Claim. That is, it doesn't do something that seems all that powerful, but it does its job with insane efficiency. I mean, after all, it's a land, which costs no mana at all. It does enter tapped, it can tap for black mana, and when it enters, you exile target player's graveyard. In other words, the Bog lets you hate on the graveyard without spending any mana, and while Tormod's Crypt certainly exists, the Bog is better in many decks for several reasons. First, the Bog isn't a spell, so only its ability can be countered, and only by some very specific counterspells. Second, it sticks around and produces mana for you, while also having the possibility of just returning to your hand and doing it all over again when you get worried again about your opponent's graveyard. Also, like Dispel, it's a card that mostly sees main deck play despite having a sideboard-like effect, and that's because the cost of running it is so low. A land entering tapped can be a little slow sometimes to be sure, but it's not all in on graveyard hate since it can also produce mana when you need it to. About 80% of its top 8s have come in the main deck. It's particularly good in decks that can tutor up lands, and that's where you see it the most. Kind of like we saw with Khalni Garden earlier, like when your deck has Primeval Titan or Expedition Map or Crop Rotation or Golos, among many other great land tutors, you're almost always going to throw a Bog in your deck since it's such a good hate piece that is so easy to tutor up. Bojuka Bog is just going to keep on seeing tons of play in multiple formats, so its incredibly high score is only going to get even higher. So, those are the 10 best cards in Worldwake. Do you want to own any of these incredibly powerful cards that are still impacting Magic's formats today? If so, check out the description where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card that appeared in the video. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe. If you want to catch up on past videos, including many more that look at specific sets, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.